Now, the final question is, when someone tries to log in, how can I be sure that the person is the correct person, is the one to whom we gave that account and authorization in the first place? I'm just going to say this very plainly. It need to be complex, and the longer the better. You can't overdo it in the length.
Are you struggling to manage secure access to your AI and JD Edwards systems? Wondering how identity and access management could safeguard your enterprise data? Today, Shawn Meade, Information Security Officer at ERP Suites, joins us to break down the essentials of IAM. Learn how to keep your AI secure and your business compliant. Stay tuned. This episode will give you the actionable insights you need. Welcome back to Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards, your go-to source for innovative insights in the JDE ecosystem. I'm Nate Bushfield, and today we're diving into identity and access management essentials, especially for AI-driven businesses. We're pleased to welcome Shawn Meade from ERP Suites. Shawn, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well, pretty well. How about you, Nate?
Having a great day, and honestly, the weather's been fantastic. We had a huge heat wave here last week. I'm just glad that it's under 90 degrees, honestly. But it is great to have you. Can you give our listeners some background on your experience?
So we won't go into exact numbers, but let's just say that I've had, you could use the plural word, decades in information technology, and through all of these, I've gone through a very deep technical side. All information security has been throughout the whole thing throughout my entire career in one way or another. And I've been at ERP as the information security officer for the past little over 5 years. And so that's my main focus. I'm also a member of something called InfraGard, which is a pretty neat thing. If any of our viewers want to check it out, it's a coalition between the FBI and basically the infrastructure of our nation as far as different companies. So check that out at infraguard.gov at some point if you want, and you can see everything about it.
That's very interesting. I honestly haven't really talked to you about that, so maybe we'll table that conversation for another day. But let's start with the basics. What exactly is identity and access management?
Okay, so now I'm going to tell you just for a moment. Go ahead. If you got a glass of water there, I want you to take a drink out of it because what I'm about to do first is very dry. And so, identity and access management, here you go, is a security discipline that focuses on controlling who accesses which resources and when. It involves managing digital identities, verifying user access, and authorizing appropriate permissions, ultimately aiming to prevent unauthorized access and maintain data integrity. And now let's step off of the witness stand and out of legalese, and let's give it a little bit where you don't have to drink as much water. Look, this is how we decide who's allowed to see something and when. Authorization tells us who's allowed to or what they're allowed to see. Identity is the idea of just having an account. Who is this in the first place? And then we should be testing to see if this is who we think it is, and that's authentication. So that's the slightly less dry version of IAM.
Exactly, and it's all about clearance. I'm sure that you went through in your FBI days. I know that I've had to do for a multitude of friends that are going through the same situations of I had to be a part of background checks of, oh, you've known this person for 7+ years. Let's make sure that they're actually a sane individual that we're going to allow to see this and make sure that the all authentication is truly there. But why is IAM critical, particularly for companies leveraging AI and even JD Edwards?
So first off, I do want to make sure because I'll get in trouble with InfraGard. I have not been in the FBI, but it's partnered with the FBI. So just a slight thing, and that's for our viewers as well. I want them to realize we're not talking about joining the FBI with that specifically, and you didn't know that ahead of time, so we're good. So why is it critical? Well, this is the beginning of how we let people into stuff in the first place. So when you're talking about AI and JD Edwards, that means that someone is going to be accessing the data in JD Edwards. And when we think about what JD Edwards is and everything that it contains. This is actually a big deal. And we want to make sure that only the proper people are accessing this appropriately. So that's why it's critical for AI and JD Edwards, because AI, when we say AI, we're talking about it doing the work for us and getting the information. So they go hand in hand. We don't want AI able to get more for this person than they should, or the person directly. So very critical. I mean, JD Edwards data is pretty important to a company.
Yeah, very true. And obviously, when you look at places or like applications, I should say, of AI, like ChatGPT, I know that the CEO was actually just quoted saying that I don't know why people trust it as much as they do. It's very true. Like it's a scary part of AI. And I bring up iRobot a lot on this podcast because that is what I think when I think of AI. And yes, like 99 out of 100 robots can be sane, but there's that one time, that one situation where it might not be correct, where there might be something loose, or we shouldn't trust specific data going into AI, and especially with something as big as ChatGPT or even Copilot or the other ones that are out there right now. It's hard to truly know where your data is going. So you have to be safe. You have to make sure that the data that you're giving it is not opening yourself up to any number of potential risks or issues.
That's what I tell people is even if it's an AI, even Chat GPT or whatever, you still have to have in your brain and your mind. I mean, there have been vulnerabilities that have been found even recently with different stuff. Look, it's like anything else on the internet, quite honestly. When you put it out there, just assume that everyone on the planet can see it. And if you keep
Exactly.
that in mind, you'll word your questions in a different way in the first place.
Exactly. But can you describe the typical security challenges businesses face without a robust IAM system?
So if if they don't have something in the first place, we've got a real problem. But identity is kind of I'm going to say at this point, we'll get into this more. At this point, I'm going to say that's the easy part. You're creating an account. So that part is not as much of the security challenge other than what we'll get into later. But authorization, now this is where the idea of robust is going to come into play because this is actually where it's more policy than product. When we're looking at authorization, why are we authorizing this account to be allowed to see whatever it is that we're going to let them see, or to access, or to create, or to modify, whatever word we want to use, it's one form or another of access, and even read-only access. Do we really want this person to be able to read this, even if they can't change it? So that's where the robust comes in, I believe. When we're looking at IAM, believe it or not, it really does start with that policy instead of worrying so much about just a product. Authentication, though, I can't stress this enough either. Without a good IAM solution, without having something really good for authentication, you're probably already letting people in that you didn't realize, or uh, at least I'll just say you're allowing more access than intended. So
Mm.
obviously, when we're talking about the JD Edwards data, like we said before, that's critical, man. That's a big issue.
Exactly. And we actually had Trina Huntsman on the pod not too long ago when we were talking about the governance and compliance side of AI and JD Edwards. And she was really breaking down what that truly looks like and what you should do in terms of how to structure that, what to look for. So, yes, if our listeners out there have not tuned into that podcast, please do. I'm sure that I'll put it up on the screen for you so it's an easy click away. But please go look at that because it is a very interesting deep dive on the specifics behind the governance and compliance. And I know that you were actually a part of that presentation during AI week as well. But it is very interesting and more of a deeper dive and look on that side of things. But could you walk us through the key components of IAM, starting with identity management?
Sure. So the components, we'll kind of do the summarization and then go into detail. Identity, authorization, and authentication. And I want us to think about them in that order. Identity management specifically, we'll start with that like you asked. And what we want to do is at this point, again, policy is really important on this. This begins with the proper authorization for the creation of an account in the first place. This is what's going to identify this person moving forward. No matter how we look at it, I mean, there may be other accounts, but in some way, this is how we identify this person. And I know this sounds simple, but without a proper process, including, by the way, monitoring and alerts, so that we know when an account has been created and do we expect that account to be created, things of that nature, we need to realize in most cases, this identity right out of the gate is going to be what is used probably, for example, through SSO to access not just a network, but access these cloud services and those cloud services. So very, very important piece of this.
Right. And honestly, there's so many moving parts when you talk about cloud services specifically. Is it like, especially when you are trusting another big data company. There's no better way to say that, I guess. But when you're trusting another company like that, they have their own rules, they have their own privacy, they have all these specific things that are already in place. But does that actually help you out? Are there specific things that you need to change there? Are there little things in there that might protect them, but might not protect you? So you make sure that you are compliant with what they're doing versus what you're doing and what you're actually trying to accomplish at the end of the day. But can you clarify the importance of authorization?
So when we look at authorization now, so we've got the name, we have the account, and so that name now, what do we want them to be able to access? And another part that a lot of times people don't think about on this is, and when should this person be able to do this anytime or only during certain hours? That's actually important for reduction of attack surface at times. So I can't, and I can't overestimate, or I just can't overstress when we're talking about authorization, how important this piece is from the policy standpoint, because this is defining this account moving forward, what it can legitimately access in digital systems, not just this one, not just that one, but kind of across the board. And we have to keep in mind when we're giving this authorization, it's not always malicious stuff about which we're concerned. It can be just, okay, they had, instead of read only, they accidentally had the access to write something. They wrote a query that had that magic word write in it instead, or put in it instead of just get, and suddenly they've accidentally changed a bunch of data. So it can cost a company. I want us to realize that, because it's not always malicious. Unforeseen circumstances are why we have authorization. Uh, just to give you an interesting example. So in the past, a little bit after World War II, believe it or not, there were actually some, I don't know whether to really call it a chemistry set or a physics set, probably physics, but they actually put out toys that had actual radioactive material in it because their intent was, hey, get everyone interested in atomic energy, and let's make it where even the children are kind of used to this idea. And so there were, of course, unforeseen circumstances. Strangely enough, certain things started happening that weren't supposed to. But bring it a little bit more up to date. Another example of unforeseen circumstances, if we're not considering this during the authorization, is Facebook themselves. They had a policy that's pretty well known now: move fast and break things. Well, that sounds all cool and everything until you do really break something or you miss something. And of course, if you do some research on it, you'll find that this caused a lot of data privacy issues. And in this day and age, we just can't afford to have that kind of stuff. So it is important to think about even the unforeseen things. Could this person accidentally do something? And what can we do if that happens? How much do we trust them? What do we want them in? I hope that gets across. That authorization thing is really important.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, obviously, human error is a part of this. And when you go to authorization, you're right. Like, it's not always malicious. It's not always a purposeful attack or a mess up or anything like that. It's like people are human. They, they're allowed to make mistakes, but when you are in a level of importance, where you need authentication or you need authorization, that's something that it can really mess up some stuff, especially when you brought up the Facebook side of things. They had so many data leaks that even myself, I don't even use Facebook anymore. And yes, Facebook owns Instagram, they own a bunch of other social media platforms that I am a part of, but I would like to think that they've learned a thing or two about their mistakes in the past. Maybe that's just me being ignorant, but we'll figure that out at some point, I'm sure. But
Yeah, you can be assured that if that is your motto, it will fulfill itself absolutely throughout the entirety of the model, especially the break things.
it is hilarious that they would actually give out physics sets that have radioactive materials in it,
Uh,
though.
yeah, that was if you go out sometime and find toys that no longer exist or that were actually dangerous. Strangely enough, that one I think actually was placed higher than Jarts. Uh, Familiar with that one, but it was
That's all.
probably appropriately higher in its level.
Yeah, I can understand why. But what role does authentication like passwords or multi-factor authentication play in securing enterprise systems? And how does this complement the authorization side?
So looking at so we have an account that identifies us now, and we're talking about we've given this account, therefore in effect the person authorization to do certain things to see whatever that may be. But now the final question is when someone tries to log in, how can I be sure that the person is the correct person, is the one to whom we gave that account and authorization in the first place? So this is the next step, the final piece actually in this setup of identity management, identity authorization, and authentication. Uh, the most common piece of this is a password. I'm just going to say this very plainly. It need to be complex, and the longer the better. You can't overdo it in the length. I'm just saying. To give you an idea, a 10-character password, even the most complex, using all the special characters, everything, 10-character password can be broken in a maximum of 2 weeks with current computing. So a maximum 10 characters, complex as you want to make it. So again, that length and complexity are what are important on that. And I mean, since we have social engineering and phishing along with brute force, these can often break a password. So MFA is another tool in our protective arsenal. These come in various flavors. SMS is the lowest security, one-time password tools, which we call generators most of the time, and even hardware tokens. And again, this I cannot again overestimate or underestimate how important this is. Uh, yeah, overestimate. Sorry, I cannot overestimate how important that is as far as it increases our security dramatically. Passwords are great. Having them 20 characters, 30 characters long, fully complex, that's awesome stuff. But still, there are ways through social engineering and especially phishing that one click and they've got the username and password. Now we need a backup. Now we need something that shores up the leaks, if you will. So that's where authentication plays and how it complements with authorization.
Of course. And I know that you're in charge of more of our password site as well in ERP Suites. And honestly, when it comes to changing my password every single time, I am a little bit annoyed that I have to change my password as much as I do. But at the same time, we're keeping it secure. We're making sure that it isn't as easy to break as it was in the past. And yes, have I failed a phishing attempt? Maybe once, maybe twice, but I think only once. So, we're still good on that side, but it is good to learn about. We have these trainings that we make sure to go through so we can identify phishing, so that we can make ourselves more and more secure. And it's something that I really haven't seen at a lot of the companies that I've worked at throughout the years, but it is something that we do prioritize here at ERP Suites, which I really do enjoy. But what are some common mistakes companies make when implementing IAM, and how can they avoid them?
So I'm going to go through this in our same order. So let's start with the identity. Not having a strong auditable process for creating an account in the first place. Okay, that's already a big mistake, huge mistake. Not having something to where we know the process, it should always be this way. So if someone goes outside of that process and is possibly creating an account that shouldn't be there, we should have a knowledge of that. Now that's the audit part, but when they do that, of course, we want to know this sooner than later. So not having monitoring and alerts for account creation would be another big problem. If a company does not have that, then that's one of the big mistakes to avoid is not having those alerts for account creation. And then going to authorization, again, we begin with that same thing, that strong auditable process for assigning access in the first place. And by the way, this includes not only to what, but when, as I stated earlier. Security roles would be a real help. So not having those actually opens us up just a little bit. And then another thing that companies don't do all the time, and I've seen this in the past with associations uh, that I've of which I've been a part. Uh, we we should always look at there are this validation. A regular basis should be set up for validation of who has what privileges. As a matter of fact, the latest, if I memory serves me, the latest version of PCI 4.0 actually requires a minimum review of 6 months for a standard account and quarterly for any kind of privileged account. And furthermore, immediate if you change a position, which makes sense. And I know this a lot of times. I think we listen to this kind of thing, and one of the big mistakes is, oh yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. I can see where that would be useful. And then we sort of leave it there on the paper as, yeah, that would be useful. Now we actually have to implement this, and it's not always easy. Yes, it's time consuming at times, and it causes people to look, oh my goodness, another quarterly review of this. I just did this. Um, yeah, but it's important, and it's important to take this stuff seriously. On authentication now, as mentioned before, look, passwords are the most common and likely component that we have in any kind of authentication. As I stated before, long and complex because of the computing power of modern computing is very important. But and I'm glad you dug into that earlier, and to dovetail off of that, having phishing training, or not having, I should say this because this is one of the big mistakes, not having any kind of phishing training means that our users do not, because this isn't everyone's bailiwick. This isn't where everyone lives as far as going through this on a daily basis. And you know what? Having phishing training in our companies actually helps the individuals in our companies as well. Uh, I look, I'm going to be honest. I have even tested my mother at times on fishing, and she does pretty darn well. Not with our company fishing training, but with my own, and just to help her to get into because people get fished all the time. But imagine now if you have someone who really isn't that familiar, and they're in a company, and they have a lot of authorization, then one click means that username and password are probably already grabbed. So now we pull in that safety net, which is MFA. And quite honestly, if you don't have MFA, let me just make it simple and short. Get it.
Yeah, it's a very important thing that honestly I feel like we take it for granted. I mean, I know from personal experience, you're right. When you send out a training every month, I'm like, oh gosh, this sucks. But it's something that I learned growing up of what phishing is, what it looks like, because it was so prevalent even in the time of my youth. Now, if you look at a lot of our company, I believe I actually am the youngest in our company. And so maybe that just wasn't a thing when a lot of them were growing up. And that makes a lot of sense because it wasn't really an idea. A lot of the platforms that we use weren't even invented back then. Not to carbon date anybody. I'm not calling them old. Uh, and somehow going to bite me in the butt. I know it. But it is a good thing that we are getting the training because, yeah, not everybody went through it. Not everybody knows or has even experienced something like this. But now that they're in a place where people are trying to get their password, are trying to get that information, they might run into that more and more and more. And so having that set up, it is one of the most important things that we can do, but it's also take it for granted. And a lot of people don't enjoy having to do it. But
True.
it really does help us out. So can you share like a real world example of how IAM prevented a major security issue or even a breach?
Oh, and by the way, so right before I hit that real world example, I just want to let you know, don't worry about that implication earlier. I may have forgotten to tell you that your minimum password length just became 30 characters, but that's all right. I'm sure it's not related. It's a
No.
real world example. Let me give you one, and I am going to read a little bit of this to make sure I don't get anything incorrectly. And my apologies if I'm mispronouncing anything compared to what others would uh, pronounce as far as some of the names. So uh, this is a big one. This is one that anyone can look up at any time, but it really does show us a good example of how these concepts play in and how important they can be. So in 2021, Microsoft actually detected attempts by and I'm going to call them the Nobelium group. Uh, they used stolen credentials and brute force to try and target of course, their first and primary is to get privileged accounts. So they were targeting any kind of privileged accounts that they could. And but what saved this whole situation was again now stolen credentials. So that means just like we mentioned earlier, username and password. We've just lost those. It's no longer protective. As a matter of fact, it's actually invasive. And but the most of those targeted accounts did have MFA enabled. So Nobelium could not get past that MFA even with a proper username and password. That's the whole purpose of multi-factor authentication. So another thing we mentioned earlier that it's not just to what you have access, but depending on the situation, when. That actually helped. They used elevated access being time bound, so that reduced their attack window. And in security, quite honestly, that's one of the most important things we can do, IAM or anywhere, is we want to narrow that attack surface as much as we can as we're doing things. So that helped to reduce that. And they also, so with the identity side of that, we've hit the MFA, which hits in the authentication, the authorization in the elevated access. But now, even in identity, the brute force patterns, which there are certain patterns out there that, especially an AI enabled detection system, can pick up. And theirs did in this case. So, because of that, security was actually notified in near real time that there was an attempt being made even at that point. And so they evaded at least most, if not all, of the major damage that would have been done by that. So there is a real world example that anyone can look up. Uh, Go ahead and look at that. Look at those details because it helps to justify everything that we've described if you're taking this forward and trying to let others know about how important this could be.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember many years ago, and hell, there's been more attempts, but I played a little bit of video games, especially in my youth. PlayStation Network. It was a time, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago now, that it was down for about 6 months or 3 months or something like that because of an attempt like this, where people were trying to get certain accounts that they could steal private information from. And yes, there was a lot of brute force, but there was this company that was out there that literally held PlayStation Network captive because they didn't have the right things in place. And PlayStation Network could not get control of their servers for 3 months. And so they ended up, it was both like they were negotiating and also doing an investigation of who this was so that they could shut it down and all this stuff. I forget how it actually came to a head and actually resolved itself. But at the end of the day, there was a lot of information that was spread for that. There was a lot of private information that was given out to the world because of an attack like this, because they didn't have the correct infrastructure to really fight this or to even notify them about this. And yes, come a long way since then. Thank God. Thank God. Even though I think it was like 2 months ago, they had an issue again where the servers were down because someone was trying to hack it again. But we could sit here all day and talk about how PlayStation Network might be, a little shaky in terms of its privacy. But I won't bore our listeners with that. Well, what should businesses consider when integrating IAM with AI and JD Edwards to maintain compliance and operation efficiency?
So my first comment to that is, as you say, integrating IAM with AI and JD Edwards. My first comment on that is yes, and so yes, you definitely want to do that anywhere and anytime possible. So again, there are a lot of products out there that can help to reduce the attack surface before even getting to the most critical pieces of JD Edwards, before even getting to the login of JD Edwards in some cases. So let's keep that in mind. We want to reduce that as much as possible, narrow the field as much right out of the gate. You can never be too early on these. And then when it comes to integrating, we're probably talking about integrating SSO with JD Edwards. This is an important consideration, and especially I want to point out if we have integrated our SSO in such a way that it has MFA as part of that single sign-on, not just an SSO that says, "Hey, here's a username and password. I win, I'm in." No, but rather instead an SSO system that actually also has tagged to it. Yes, we're going to make sure this is your standard username and password, but even in getting into this, because it's integrated, we're going to wind up asking you for an MFA prompt as well. And I think that's very important. And when you say how important could this be, I guess my question to our listeners would be, I'm assuming most everyone is running JD Edwards if they're watching this. So I want to just think for a moment. What happens if someone gets into your JD Edwards? What can they see? What can they do? And I'm not even talking about, oh, let's do ransomware, let's lock it down and make it to where your business can't operate for weeks. I'm not talking even going that far. What happens if someone gets into your infrastructure information in JD Edwards? You could wind up getting org chart kind of information if you put it together properly, finances, everything. You might as well just publish it. So that's the question. When we ask ourselves, is this important? Well, do we want it just spread out there and put it on an open web page or not? And that'll tell us how important it is.
So yeah, when we're talking about the integration of it, whose job should it truly be to control IAM? Are there specific roles out there, or is it everyone?
So when we look at this, there's an implementation piece, but there's also a policy piece, as I've mentioned a couple of times. So that policy, because of policy, obviously information security, setting policies that keep us on the proper edge of all of this. That's important. They should definitely be involved. Also in the alerts, they should be getting all kinds of alerts on this kind of stuff. If well, account creation, all those pieces. So there's the information security piece. Audit and compliance, that should be part of it, because obviously security could come up with something, and let's say security says, I have a friend who's been complaining left and right. They want just a 4-character minimum on passwords and stuff like that. That's when our audit compliance should come along and smack us around a little bit in information security and say, I don't care who your friend is. That doesn't go with our compliance standards. That doesn't go with what our auditors are going to say is okay. So all those should work hand in hand. So there's another piece. But now that we've got a couple of the operational and how your company wants to set up, who actually sets up each piece of this. Sometimes it's server teams that actually create the accounts and all that, but you've got to have this oversight and this process in place that can be audited. And so more than one group, but when we talk about the governance groups, you're going to have information security, audit, and compliance, but then we need to make sure that there's buy-in from above, because this is going to impact your company. And this is going to be something where sometimes we have to be very unpopular in putting out what some would call dictates, but what we really need to look at is that we're actually putting out safety measures. If there were no bad guys, hey, we wouldn't have to worry about any of this. But they work very hard at their jobs, and so they kind of make the rest of us work hard at ours. So let's keep that in mind, that they really are very dedicated to the craft. I'm not trying to give any undue credit. I don't in any way endorse black hat or any of that, or hacking that's not ethical hacking. But I do want us to realize that they do work very hard at this. So we have to be diligent as well. And that goes up to the top. So when information security and/or audit compliance come up and say, look, we need to increase the password minimum to 15 characters with the computing power that's just come out, this latest breakthrough, whatever the reason, I'm just throwing that out as a hypothetical. We need to up our standards to 15, up to 20, up to 25, whatever it is. Trust me, your information security department is not just being mean to everyone else, because here's the kick. And I can say this from information security, we have to use it as well. We don't always love having to do all the different steps either, but we of all people have to, not just for appearance, but because it involves real security. And that's actually, some of that does go across the board to all of us. The phishing, being careful of this and that, yes, that part is all of us, but I do want to specifically call out upper management, information security, and audit and compliance. They need to be major players in this policy and setting this up.
Yeah, exactly. And great insights from you today, Shawn. Seriously, for those who are listening, securing your systems doesn't have to be complicated. ERP Suites is here to help you navigate IAM, safeguard your AI initiatives, and protect your JD Edwards environment. Visit us at erpsuites.com to learn more, or look in the description below to take our security assessment. But that's a wrap on today's episode of Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. Huge shout out to you, Shawn, for joining us today and sharing your insights. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with a colleague. Until next time, stay secure, stay informed, and keep innovating. Catch you next week.